With 32 NFL teams, there are bound to be teams in different stages of competing. The Kansas City Chiefs, for example, are 5-0 and are coming off of back-to-back Super Bowl titles and are without a doubt in win-now mode. But others, like the Carolina Panthers, are 1-4 and have had a bad start to the year, and for Carolina specifically, it was always going to be an uphill battle in 2024, but you would have liked to have seen more from them through the first 5 games. And in theory, they definitely need to rebuild and could certainly apply for today's video, but we opted to go with 4 other NFL teams that need to rebuild. These teams have had some ups and downs to start the year, and one of these teams in particular has had insanely high highs just in the first 5 weeks alone. But the NFL season is a marathon and not a sprint, and I would be very surprised if any of these teams make the playoffs due to a multitude of reasons, and in today's video, we're going to break down why they need to commit to a full rebuild. And there is a lot to dive into, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders entered the 2024 season in an interesting situation as they were coming off of a good end to the 2023 season. They finished the year with an 8-9 record and were just 3-5 under head coach Josh McDaniels before he was fired after a 26-14 loss in Detroit. The Raiders proceeded to go 5-4 in the remaining 9 games with Antonio Pierce as their head coach, and the Raiders looked like a completely different team. The difference between the Raiders in the first half of the 23 season and the second half of the 23 season was noticeable, and they chose to keep Antonio Pierce as the team's head coach, which was a decision I loved. Players bought in, and the big thing to remember with the Raiders is, outside of a few positions, this is a pretty solid team. Now, the Davante Adams situation and the way this played out was unfortunate, and there were a lot of rumblings last season in terms of him possibly getting traded, but my biggest concern with the Raiders entering the 2024 season was the quarterback position. Entering the year with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell as the 2 best options was certainly a choice, and through the first 5 games, they've thrown 5 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. And the Raiders have a turnover margin of -7 through 5 games, which, as you can imagine, is near the bottom of the league, and it's actually tied for dead last with the Titans, who have had their fair share of turnovers too. The thing with the Raiders is I still like a lot of players on this roster, and I think they can be good foundational pieces for the next few years. I just think they should trim the fat and acknowledge that a rebuild is what they need, rather than try and enter the year with either Gardner or AOC at quarterback and go from there. I mean, if you are in a race and you have Lamborghinis and Ferraris in the race, and you need to compete with those types of cars, like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, why are you entering the year with a Chevy Impala? And no disrespect to the Impalas either, they're just not Ferraris or Lamborghinis, and entering the year with this quarterback room was always shouting to the rest of the NFL that we are at maximum a wild card exit team, and that was even in the best case scenario. They need to commit to a rebuild, and one of the problems for not just the Raiders, but for any team that needs a quarterback entering the 2025 season is the 2025 draft is not quarterback rich, and that's going to present a challenge for the Raiders because then the question will be, do you go after somebody like Sam Darnold, who has shown flashes in the 24 season that nobody thought he could, or do you reach on a quarterback and kind of hope he works out? I think reaching on a quarterback would be a bad decision, but the point is, they need a quarterback and they'll also need a running back and a few receivers as well. I like Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker, and I really like Trey Tucker, but even Raiders fans don't think they're going to carry a receiving room. I don't think the Chargers are a serious threat in the AFC this year, but knowing Kansas City is where they are and attacking the trenches the way the Chargers did this offseason, and also by bringing in high floor players, is what I would love for the Raiders to do this offseason. I loved their first 2 picks this year in Brock Bowers and Jackson Powers-Johnson, and thought those 2 were great picks at the time. And given that I run a football YouTube channel, it should not come as a surprise that I enjoy attending live football games. And recently I went to a Kent State-Penn State game, and I got to watch a couple of prospects up close, like Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Tyler Warren, and Abdul Carter, and this was all possible through the Game Time app. Game Time is a great ticketing app, and a couple of my favorite features, but not limited to, are the all-in pricing and the seat views. And I am looking at attending a Jaden Daniels game coming up, as he's an electric rookie and it'd be cool to see him in person, and I don't have to worry about an additional $85 in fees when I go to check out. The price that I see on the Game Time app is the price that I'm paying. I love the Game Time Picks part of the app because it allows you to see the top 5 or 10% of the ticket deals in every section. It takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code ANALYSIS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, and again, that's code ANALYSIS, ANALYSIS, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. The New York Giants are in an interesting situation, and contrary to a couple of teams in today's video, I would consider this more of a retool rather than a true tear it down and rebuild. And when we did the Giants team preview before the year, I was higher on Daniel Jones than a lot of people. The big thing with Daniel was, can we get 2022 Daniel and not 2023 Daniel pre-injury, because the player we saw last year was bad. And he's been much better in 24 outside of one game, which was against one of the best defenses in the league in the Minnesota Vikings. In the 4 games since then, he's thrown for over 950 yards and 6 touchdowns to just 1 interception, and would be on pace for over 4,000 passing yards, 26 passing touchdowns, and just 4 interceptions over the course of a 17-game season. There were a lot of trying times in 2023, and perhaps no game exemplified that better than the Seahawks game on Monday night. The Giants lost by 21 points at home, and the quarterback they controversially gave a $160 million contract to played terrible and even threw a 100-yard pick six to then-rookie Devin Witherspoon. Not surprisingly, once their quarterback went down, the Giants didn't have a lot of success, and there was a point where they were starting undrafted rookie Tommy DeVito. It was a very long year for this team, but I really think they've been playing better, and it's due in some part to Daniel Jones. The game against Washington was tough because they lost due in large part to not having a kicker be able to kick extra points to keep them in the game. I know Daniel threw the one bad 2-point conversion within that game, but he's been fine in 2024. The offensive line hasn't been great as a whole, and the Giants are bottom 5 in both rushing touchdowns as a team and yards per carry as a team. The retool with the Giants revolves around the offensive line, because whether the running back is Saquon Barkley, Devin Singletary, or even Tyrone Tracy, they're not going to be able to maximize what they can do. And by the way, Tyrone played awesome against the Seahawks. Now, with Daniel playing better to start the year, if this keeps up, there's going to be some very interesting questions. Do they roll with Daniel Jones for another year, or does Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen take a chance at a quarterback in the draft, knowing their jobs would be tied to that quarterback's success? And I think this is why the Giants are in one of the most interesting situations. They have a head coach who has shown at times to be a good offensive mind and a guy who can very easily lead an NFL team for the next few years, but they've been up and down at the quarterback position. It was widely known the Giants were interested in Jayden Daniels, and unfortunately Washington wouldn't budge, and they couldn't trade from pick 6 to pick 2 to select Jayden. Malik Neighbors isn't a bad consolation prize by any means, but the Giants' plan this offseason has to be to get better in the trenches, and I think the jury is out on whether or not they're going to take a quarterback. If I had to guess, I think they would take a quarterback, simply because I don't think Daboll and Schoen would want to go down with Daniel Jones leading the ship. And this would be without ever taking a swing at a quarterback of their own, by the way. I could easily get behind that train of thought because they would also try to improve the offensive line and have one of the best receivers in the league to throw the ball to in Malik Neighbors. The one big question that I go back to, even when Daniel Jones is playing well, like he is now, is do the Giants have enough to seriously compete when it matters with DJ as their quarterback? And the answer is no. I think the Giants' ceiling is 7 wins, maybe 8, and they will probably be looking for their quarterback of the future in April. I truly think the Cleveland Browns are in the worst situation in football, and it's more than just Deshaun Watson. We'll get to Deshaun in a second, as that's an entirely different thing, but they have a lot of problems on the offense. I was never the biggest fan of the trio of Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, and Elijah Moore to begin with, and they haven't been set up for success in the early parts of the 2024 season, but even when they have had opportunities, they've dropped a lot of passes. There was a tweet from Mike Clay of ESPN that said 45% of passes directed at Amari Cooper have qualified as off-target this season, and there hasn't been an off-target rate that high for a player with 40-plus targets since at least prior to 2011. As if the receiving trio consisting of those 3 players isn't enough of a hindrance to the team, the quarterback play has also been awful, and we see it every Sunday. But there's an even bigger problem for Cleveland, and I guess you could say pun intended, and it's that they're going to have to replace a lot of the offensive line. Replacing any good starter along the offensive line is always tough because the reality is good offensive linemen rarely become available. Sure, you may get a 30-plus-year-old veteran hit free agency that's been in the league for 8 years and has thousands of snaps on his body and hope that he can become the player he was at 25 or 26 years old, but drafting a good offensive lineman and having them be a plug-and-play guy for a decade is invaluable. And Cleveland had that with Joel Bitonio, who turned 33 years old the day prior to this video being released. Happy birthday, Joel. And he has logged over 10,000 career snaps, and it's starting to show. Wyatt Teller will be 30 in November and has 1 year left on his contract after this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if Cleveland moves him at the trade deadline in an attempt to get draft capital on a player that will not be around for the next 3 to 4 years. Jack Conklin is also 30 and has played in 10 games or more just once in the past 3 years and cannot be relied on to be the long-term starter. Unfortunately, Cleveland has had a lot of injuries along the offensive line to start the year, and they've had 9 different linemen play in the first 5 games, with 4 of them allowing double-digit pressures. They also don't have to technically replace left tackle Jedrick Wills, but he's an average player and he's not a great franchise-changing left tackle by any means. So there's a real possibility Cleveland has 3 new offensive linemen in 2025, with one of the returners being an average player. The receiving room isn't good enough, and more than half of the offensive line is going to have to be replaced within 2 years at most. And this has nothing to do with Deshaun Watson, who is an entirely different problem. I'm not going to go too much into this because I would imagine we all feel the same way, but what you may not know is Cleveland has pushed a lot of his money down the road, and he is still owed a lot. For reference, his cap hit in 2025 is scheduled to be $72.9 million, and this is per over the cap. Then they still owe Deshaun a total of $172 million, and the only thing Cleveland can really hope for at this point is for any case to come up that would allow them to get out of this contract. Because if they can't, then they're going to have to pay Deshaun roughly a quarter of their salary cap in each of the next 2 seasons. The contract was fully guaranteed, and all they can do is push the money down the road. When you factor in the contract with an awful quarterback, who nobody would trade for by the way, an aging offensive line, and a receiving room that's not good, while wasting the prime of a great defense, I think this is the worst situation in football. The New Orleans Saints are a team that I thought should have committed to a rebuild 2 or 3 years ago, and they have continuously kicked the can down the road since, and here we are. They're 2-3, Derek Carr is injured, and Derek Carr being injured doesn't have anything to do with today's video, as I thought they should have committed to a rebuild last offseason, whether or not Derek Carr had a Pro Bowl caliber year or not. But Derek Carr had a great first 2 games, and the rest of the Saints did too. They put up 91 total points against the Panthers and Cowboys, and the Week 1 game against the Panthers, it was kind of, okay, you guys are playing the Panthers, good job, good win, but how much are we really going to buy into a game where you beat one of the worst teams in the league? And the Panthers looked absolutely awful, especially when Bryce Young was starting, all around. But Week 2 against Dallas was different, as they put up 44 points on the road, and Derek Carr played like an MVP caliber quarterback. They have lost 3 games since, and after putting up 44 points, at least in each of the first 2 games, they put up just 49 points in the ensuing 3 games. Now, it would be ignorant for me to sit here and not acknowledge the offensive line injuries, and especially the injury to center Erik McCoy. McCoy had a really good 2023 season, and he was named to the Pro Bowl as a replacement for Frank Ragnow. Contrary to the reputation the Pro Bowl in today's era gets, it was a true Pro Bowl year for Erik McCoy. It wasn't just a, let's just toss him in for the sake of tossing him in. He had a really good year last year, and he was off to an elite start to the 2024 season. For reference, he allowed a single pressure in 49 pass blocking snaps to start the 2024 season, and if you were to extrapolate that to maybe 550 or 600 passing attempts over the course of a season, he would have only allowed 11 or 12 pressures over the course of the entire year. And if you are an optimistic Saints fan and think that the offense will return to what they had in weeks 1 and 2 when Erik McCoy played when he comes back from injury, by all means, go for it. Although I think even the most optimistic Saints fans don't think they're going to average 45 points per game the way they did in the first 2 games of the year. That's just not realistic for New Orleans or for anybody. But taking a look at their roster for a minute, guys, this is an old roster that's also not very talented, and they have a lot of money that they're going to have to push around, and we call this Loomis dollars for a reason. But the Saints are going to have to replace Alvin Kamara this offseason. He has a $29 million cap hit next year, with only 4 of the $29 million being a dead cap, so the Saints will save $25 million by cutting Alvin Kamara. Running backs obviously do not age gracefully given the physical impact of their position, and I do think this is Alvin Kamara's final year as a Saint. So there's already one position you're going to have to replace, and Cameron Jordan is obviously getting up there, and he obviously is nowhere close to the player that he was even 3 or 4 years ago, and he's going to have to be replaced as well. Marshon Lattimore has a cap hit of $31 million, and he's playing good to start the year, but it is worth noting that corners do not age gracefully either, and they kind of go from playing at a good or a great level, like Marshon is right now, and usually they kind of fall off the cliff. There usually is no 1 or 2 year period to really brace yourself for the inevitable departure of a longtime corner. Now, Marshon is only 28 years old. He'll, of course, be 29 next year. I don't think it's worth replacing him right now, although the eventual replacement is, I would guess, at most a year and a half away for Marshon Lattimore. So there's another pricey veteran you're going to have to replace. And the offensive line, outside of Erik McCoy, has had its ups and downs, and I do think Talisi Fuaga will be a good starting left tackle for them for the long run, although he definitely had a welcome to the NFL couple of plays against the Chiefs, and I'm definitely not out on Talisi after one not great game, especially against the Chiefs of all defenses. But it is worth noting that the right tackle position is one they're going to have to replace too. I don't think Trevor Penning is a good player, and Ryan Ramczyk right now is not a player they can depend on. He had a big injury this offseason, and it was reported that it may have been career threatening, and he's also getting up there in age, and obviously given the wear and tear on his body over the course of 7 or 8 years in the NFL, I think they're going to have to replace the right tackle as well. So we're talking about multiple big positions to replace, and I also don't think Derek Carr is going to ever win this team a Super Bowl, or any team a Super Bowl, and that's even before the injury that he sustained last week. My opinion on Derek Carr did not change from last week to this week. I also don't think Spencer Rattler is going to play that well in Week 6 against the Bucs for a couple of reasons. He's a rookie, and he's a 5th round rookie for a reason, and he's also playing behind a not great offensive line. In some ways, this could resemble the Drake May situation going up against Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter in his NFL debut. I hope the best for Spencer Rattler, and I hope that he can become a good quarterback for this team, but to expect him to perform well while Derek Carr is hurt, again, behind a not great offensive line, to me is a little unrealistic. So when you factor in that the Saints roster isn't all that talented, and the fact that they have a lot of aging talent, especially at the quarterback position, and whether you know this or not, Derek Carr has a cap hit of $51 million next year, I think the Saints' best bet is to rebuild now rather than continuously kick the can down the road, because the Saints can win the NFC South, maybe not in 2024, but if they rebuild correctly, they can put their foot in the ground and have really a chokehold on the rest of the NFC South, because the NFC South, the Bucs and Falcons are talented, but they're not top of the league. They're not Super Bowl contenders. And I know Bucs fans think that I underrate them at times, or that I dismiss them, but I think they're a very talented team. But I think the Saints can propel themselves if they fully commit to a rebuild, which unfortunately I don't think is going to happen while Mickey Loomis is the GM. The bottom line is I think the Saints should rebuild, because I would rather have 1 year where they go 5-12, maybe 6-11, maybe 4-13 in the worst case, although I think this roster is too talented to go 4-13, for a much, much better tomorrow. I am really sick of the Saints just continuously kicking the can down the road for what has been mediocre results. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as we are closing in on 160k subs and helps the channel tremendously. Thank you to Game Time for sponsoring today's video, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.